Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into something absolutely fascinating. It's this massive hidden clash going on right in the architecture of our modern world. Basically, it's an invisible but incredibly high-stakes battle between secular, automated mechanics on one side and the deeply unquantifiable human soul on the other. Now, on the surface, our digital world feels super ordered and objective, right? But as we comb through our sources today, we're going to explore a really provocative argument that this so-called neutral systems logic might actually be stripping the divine out of our lives and paving the way for some of the oldest forms of bureaucratic control.
So here is our roadmap for today. We're going to start with Tears in the Rain, then unpack the myth of secular neutrality. From there, we'll explore bureaucracy and banal evil and law without a god. Finally, we'll take a look at the algorithmic parasite and wrap it all up with the ultimate human choice.
All right, let's jump right into Section 1, Tears in the Rain.
This specific debate actually perfectly frames the entire journey we're about to take. We've got two modern thinkers, digital culture critic Damian Walter and systems architect Kyle MacLean Smith. And they're fiercely debating Rutger Hauer's iconic, entirely improvised Tears in the Rain monologue from the movie Blade Runner. Walter views this incredible cinematic moment through a strictly secular, mechanical lens. He essentially calls it a historically lucky fluke, just a random statistical accident on a movie set. But Smith, he aggressively rejects that reductionism. He argues the monologue is literally a Christian moment of divine inspiration. So we're looking at two totally different realities here, one that sees a statistical accident and one that sees the sacred.
According to our source material on the ghost in the machine and the bureaucratic soul, this movie debate highlights what the authors see as a much larger, frankly terrifying conflict. They argue that when society chooses to view a profound expression of the human soul as nothing more than a mechanical output or a statistical fluke, we're actively choosing to strip divine meaning right out of our existence. And according to these texts, that kind of reductionism has massive, real-world consequences.
Which brings us to Section 2, the myth of secular neutrality.
Take a look at this definition of anti-theology. Our sources point out that this secular world loves to actively mask itself as pure, neutral logic and reason. But in reality, the authors argue it functions as a highly aggressive competing religion, an anti-theology. It doesn't just quietly ignore God. It actively replaces divine authority with its own ideological systems of human and technological control. It's demanding the exact same submission as any ancient religion, just dressed up as secular neutrality.
The sources argue this ideology manifests incredibly clearly today in what we know as transhumanism. Silicon Valley elites are pursuing a form of literal physical immortality, which completely displaces the supreme lawgiver with human reason. In this worldview, which the authors argue functionally counterfeits divine creation, our biological state, with all its messy human emotions and mortality, is rejected. They just see it as a messy transitional phase. It's an ideological pursuit that completely replaces the spiritual with the mechanical.
Moving on to Section 3, Bureaucracy and Banal Evil.
I want you to just read this incredibly powerful quote from political philosopher Hannah Arendt. She's looking back at colonial legal structures. These were systems that rapidly processed human beings through courts without legal counsel, just to maintain imperial order. She argues these hyper-efficient mechanical systems were actually the preparatory stage for the totalitarian catastrophes of the 20th century. By turning people into processing units, these systems entirely removed individual moral responsibility from the equation.
And this brilliantly illustrates a core theme of our texts today. Secular is banal, and secular is anti-theology. It perfectly captures the Kafkaesque banality of evil. When we allow algorithms, bureaucracies, and secular mechanics to evaluate human life, we create a system completely devoid of moral friction. Reducing the human soul to a bureaucratic number normalizes totalitarian control and spiritual suppression. It literally turns horrific evil into just another banal, mundane administrative output.
Let's dive into Section 4, Law Without a God. This is where it gets wild. Academic research mapping out the ideology in George Lucas's Star Wars points to a truly fascinating connection. The Force is actually analyzed here as a representation of modern law. Think about it. It desires absolute balance and order, but it remains entirely unanchored to a supreme divine lawgiver. Our sources argue this perfectly mirrors global capitalism, which also lets go of materiality to achieve decentralized control. And the ideological prop that holds this all together? The tenets of Western Buddhism, preaching inner peace and letting go. The result is a system designed to deliver perfect, unfeeling order without any divinity whatsoever.
As this excerpt points out, if you drill down past all the cool theological mysticism, you find what the author calls a perverse nomological core.
Like modern law, it proclaims order within disorder. It's a system entirely disconnected from the divine, yet very much connecting and controlling us all. Honestly, much like the algorithmic systems running our digital lives today.
So let's look at how that works in Section 5, the algorithmic parasite.
To truly grasp how these secular systems control us right now, our sources pivot to a terrifying and, frankly, morbidly fascinating biological metaphor from the natural world. According to research from Penn State, the zombie ant fungus is a parasite that literally takes over a host's body. But what's truly horrifying is how it operates. It creates a 3D network that invades the ant's muscle fibers, controlling the host's legs and mandibles like a puppeteer pulling strings. But get this. The fungus never actually invades the brain. It controls the host's peripheral behavior entirely from the outside.
Our sources map that exact parasitic behavior directly onto modern digital platforms. Just like that creepy fungus, automated moderation platforms do not understand the brain or the spiritual intent of a human being. They only measure peripheral behavior, keyword repetition, hostility metrics, formatting. They control the flow of human discourse by strictly managing the mechanical outputs, completely and utterly blind to the soul behind the text.
Look at the stark contrast here. When a user posts an aggressive, spiritually urgent message denouncing a secular worldview, acting much like a historical prophet would, the platform's algorithm doesn't see a prophet. No way. It sees topic derailment and flags it as trolling. It sees intense, adversarial language and flags it as abusive spam. The exact same text is viewed as a mechanical violation by the machine, but as a sacred, adversarial denunciation by the human.
So the crucial point the sources make is that these centralized platforms act as a massive digital enclosure. Because they have to manage billions of interactions, they rely on blunt binary code. And in doing so, they accidentally filter out the exact type of disruptive, adversarial friction that historically sparks human spiritual awakening. The machine isn't actively trying to kill religion, right? It's just processing humans as behavioral metrics.
Which brings us to our final stop, Section 6, the ultimate human choice.
This all builds to what systems architect Kyle McLean Smith calls the mechatronic fork. We essentially have two paths forward as a society. On the left, we can surrender to an opaque monoculture. That's a centralized, narrative-driven surveillance state managed by tech elites who view humanity as a messy biological problem that needs to be managed. Or, on the right, we have distributed, free and open-source software, systems powered by auditable, peer-to-peer code that actually engineer a structural escape route away from centralized control.
And as the source text emphasizes here, we cannot accept the excuse that these systems suppress the human spirit simply because they are operating at a massive scale. Blaming the scale of these algorithms is an excuse Kafka himself wouldn't accept. It treats a totally fixable, design-level failure of modern tech feudalism as if it were some unalterable law of nature. But remember, we are the ones building the architecture.
So I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. As these technologies of control grow increasingly powerful, blurring the lines between neutral mechanics and spiritual suppression, which path of the mechatronic fork will you choose? Will you surrender to the banal algorithmic processing of your digital soul, or will you demand a structurally auditable future? Keep questioning the architecture being built around you. Thanks for watching.